The first time I saw Maya Reyes, she was standing by the tall glass window of the university library, her dark hair catching the last golden light of a September afternoon. She had a book pressed against her chest, something thick with a worn spine, and she was staring out at the courtyard with an expression I couldn't quite name. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was more like longing, the kind that lives quietly in a person for so long it starts to look like peace. I had been coming to that library every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 weeks. I had my corner, the one near the philosophy section, beside a dying fern that nobody seemed to water, and I had my routine, green tea from the campus cafe, my notebook, my highlighters, and the comfortable invisibility of being just another graduate student drowning in research. I liked the library because it asked nothing of me. It didn't require small talk or smiling. It just held me in its quiet arms and let me think. But that afternoon, everything about my routine dissolved the moment I saw her. She turned from the window then, as if she felt my gaze, and our eyes met across the long reading tables. Hers were dark brown, almost black, with something warm and searching in them. For a split second, neither of us moved. Then she gave me a small, uncertain smile, the kind you give a stranger when you've been caught in a private moment, and looked down at her book. I sat down at my usual table, opened my notebook, and wrote absolutely nothing for 45 minutes. Her name, I would learn later, was Maya Catalina Reyes. She was a second-year MFA student in creative writing. She was from San Antonio, Texas. She had a habit of chewing on the end of her pen when she was thinking hard, and she made tiny pencil marks in the margins of every book she read. Little asterisks and question marks and occasional exclamation points, like a private conversation she was having with the author, but I didn't know any of that yet. That evening, I only knew that something had shifted inside me, quiet and seismic, like a tectonic plate moving a millimeter beneath the surface of the ocean. I went home and told myself it was nothing. I was very good at telling myself things were nothing. My name is Layla Farrick. I was 26 that September, a PhD student in comparative literature, midway through a dissertation on diasporic memory and post-colonial fiction. I had grown up in a Persian-American household in Northern California, the eldest daughter of 2 people who loved each other deeply and had very clear ideas about what my future was supposed to look like. Graduate school fit the picture perfectly. So did the eventual professorship, the respectful marriage, the careful, curated life. What didn't fit, what had never quite fit, no matter how many times I tried to fold it into the right shape, was the part of myself that had always felt a particular electricity in the presence of certain women. I had spent years building walls around that feeling, telling myself it was admiration or envy or some abstract aesthetic appreciation. I was 26 years old and I was still trying to convince myself. Then I saw Maya by the window, and the walls started to shake. We met officially 2 weeks later, at a panel discussion on post-colonial narratives in contemporary fiction. It was held in one of the humanities building's wood-paneled seminar rooms, the kind that smells like old paper and institutional coffee and possibility. I had arrived early and taken a seat near the back. The room filled slowly, mostly graduate students, a few faculty, a handful of curious undergrads. I was reading over my notes when someone sat down in the empty chair beside me and said, "Excuse me, is anyone sitting here?" I looked up. It was her. Up close, she was even more arresting than she had been across the library. She had a small silver stud in her nose, and she was wearing a dark green sweater that had a small paint stain near the left cuff. Her eyes found mine and lit up with faint recognition. "You're the girl from the library," she said. "The philosophy section." I blinked. "You noticed me?" She laughed, a bright, unguarded sound. "I notice everything. Occupational hazard of being a writer." She held out her hand. "Maya Reyes, Layla Farrick." Her handshake was warm and firm, and she held it half a second longer than strictly necessary. Or maybe I imagined that. I was very good at imagining things. We sat through the panel together. And somewhere during the second speaker's remarks on Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Maya leaned close and whispered a comment about something the panelist had said, something wry and incisive, and I had to press my lips together to keep from laughing out loud. Afterward, without either of us quite suggesting it, we walked out of the building together and ended up at the small coffee shop on the corner of Merton and Vine. We talked for 2 hours. I learned that she was from San Antonio. where her grandmother still made tamales every Christmas. I learned that she had nearly gone to law school before a creative writing professor read one of her stories and told her she had an obligation to keep writing. I learned that she was working on a collection of linked short stories about 3 generations of women in a Mexican-American family. That she played the guitar badly and the piano slightly less badly. And that she had a cat named Borges. You named your cat after Jorge Luis Borges? I said. He has a very labyrinthine personality, she said seriously. And then we both started laughing again, walking home alone that night. I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time, genuinely uncomplicated happy. Not the performed happiness I'd gotten skilled at producing for family dinners and department parties. But the real thing, warm and fizzing and a little terrifying. I texted my best friend Priya. I met someone interesting today. Priya, who had known me since undergrad and who had more than once gently suggested I explore my feelings a little more openly, texted back. Tell me everything, immediately. I put my phone in my pocket and smiled at the empty sidewalk. October arrived and painted the campus in amber and rust. Maya and I had developed a rhythm without either of us naming it. Tuesdays at the library, where we sat at adjacent tables and worked in parallel silence broken by occasional whispered observations. Thursday afternoons at the coffee shop on Merton and Vine. And an ongoing text conversation that had become the first thing I looked at in the morning and the last thing I thought about at night. She sent me things, passages from books she was reading, voice memos of song fragments she was composing, pictures of Borges sitting in increasingly unlikely places, the top of a bookshelf, inside a salad bowl, balanced improbably on the windowsill, looking philosophical. I sent her back half-finished thoughts about my dissertation, links to articles I thought she'd find interesting, photos of particularly beautiful sentences I underlined in my reading. We were building something. I could feel it the way you feel weather changing, not yet visible, but present in the air. A shift in pressure that your body registers before your mind catches up. One Thursday in mid-October, she arrived at the coffee shop looking tired. There were shadows under her eyes and a tension in her jaw that I hadn't seen before. She dropped into the chair across from me and said, I had the worst writing session of my life today. Tell me, I said, and she did. She told me about the story she'd been working on for weeks. The one about her grandmother arriving in Texas from Oaxaca at 19 years old. Alone and frightened and fiercely determined. She'd had the architecture of it clear in her mind for months. But today every sentence she wrote felt false, hollow, like she was writing around the emotional core rather than through it. I think the problem, she said, wrapping both hands around her coffee cup, is that I'm afraid of getting it wrong. She passed away 3 years ago. I'm the one keeping the story now. What if I don't do it justice? There was a real grief in her voice, quiet but present. I looked at her across the small table and felt a rush of something fierce and tender. You already are doing it justice, I said. The fear you're describing, that's not a failure. That's how much you love her. Writers who don't care don't feel that kind of terror. She looked at me for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted, softened. How do you always know exactly what to say? She asked. I don't, I said. I'm just telling you what I see. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine briefly, just a few seconds. Thank you, Layla, she said softly. The touch lasted no time at all. But I felt it for the rest of the evening. Later, walking home through falling leaves, I had a very honest conversation with myself. The kind where you stop being polite to your own feelings and just let them speak plainly. The honest answer was this. I was falling in love with Maya Reyes, not toward it. Not approaching it from a distance, I was already in the middle of it. Had been for weeks, maybe from the very first afternoon by the library window. The feeling wasn't frightening anymore. It was the truest thing I'd felt in years. What I didn't know yet was whether she felt any of it too. November came, and with it the peculiar intimacy of shorter days and longer evenings. The coffee shop started putting out candles on the tables. The library grew warmer and more womb-like. Maya and I moved closer together, incrementally, chairs angled toward each other, shoulders occasionally touching, the proximity that happens naturally when two people have stopped guarding their space. Grew warmer and more womb-like. Maya and I moved closer together. Incrementally, chairs angled toward each other, shoulders occasionally touching. The proximity that happens naturally when two people have stopped. Priya came to visit for a weekend in early November and met Maya at a dinner I organized at my apartment. Pasta, wine, the kind of low-stakes evening that was really, under its surface, enormously high stakes. I watched Priya watch Maya, and I saw my best friend's face, the exact expression I had been hoping for: warmth, approval, and a look in her eyes that said, "We will discuss this at length later." Maya was brilliant at dinner. She told a story about getting lost in Mexico City at 17 that had all four of us, my friend. Darius was there too, holding our sides. She asked Priya genuinely thoughtful questions about her work as an architect. She helped me clear the plates without being asked. And when our hands brushed in the kitchen over the sink, neither of us moved away. Later, after everyone had gone and I was cleaning up, Priya appeared in the kitchen doorway with a knowing look that could have illuminated a small room. "Layla," she said. "Don't," I said. "She likes you," Priya said. I set down the dish I was drying. "You don't know that." "I absolutely know that." "She watched you when you weren't looking. All evening." Priya came into the kitchen and leaned against the counter. "More importantly, you like her. Priya, you lit up every time she talked. You keep doing this thing where you tuck your hair behind your ear when she says something funny. You do not do that with other people." I didn't say anything. Outside, the first real winter wind moved through the trees. "You deserve this," Priya said gently. "Whatever this is, you deserve to find out." I thought about my parents, about their hopes, about the life shape they had carefully imagined for me. I thought about the girl I had been at 17. At 20, at 23, always managing, always calibrating, always finding reasons why the thing I actually felt had to be set aside. "I'm scared," I admitted. It was the first time I had said it to anyone. Priya crossed the kitchen and hugged me. "That's because it's real," she said. "The scary ones are always the real ones." I held on for a moment, then let go. "What if she doesn't?" I started. "Then you'll have the answer," Priya said. "And answers are better than silences." Trust me. After she left, I sat in my living room for a long time in the dark, thinking. Not about whether my feelings were real, I'd stopped arguing that point. But about what I was brave enough to do with them. It was the second week of November, a Thursday. We had been at the coffee shop until closing, and when we stepped out, the sky had opened. Rain was sheeting down the street, collecting in the gutters, bouncing off the hoods of parked cars. We stood under the small awning outside the shop, our shoulders nearly touching, looking at the wall of water. "Well," Maya said. "My apartment is 3 blocks, I said. "Mine is 8. We looked at each other. She was wearing that same dark green sweater from the first day, and her hair was starting to curl slightly from the humidity. And her eyes in the streetlight were so warm and alive that I felt a physical ache somewhere behind my sternum. "Run?" She said. We ran. We arrived at my building laughing and soaked, shaking water out of our hair in the entrance hall. I fumbled with my keys and got the door open, and we tumbled inside into the warm, dry air of my apartment. I found towels, put the kettle on, and Maya stood dripping in my kitchen, looking utterly unbothered about the state of her, which somehow made her even more beautiful. We changed. I lent her a dry sweater and sweatpants and sat on my couch with tea. And the evening took on the quality of something suspended. Like a note held long past where you expect it to end. We talked for hours. About childhood, hers in San Antonio, mine in Northern California. About our families with all their love and all their weight. About what it felt like to be between worlds, to carry multiple languages inside you, to be always slightly translating yourself. And then, around midnight, Maya said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," I said. She was quiet for a moment, turning her tea mug in her hands. Then she looked at me directly, with that searching quality I had noticed from the very beginning. "Do you ever feel like you've been a slightly smaller version of yourself for most of your life?" she asked. "Like you've been living inside a shape that fits pretty well, but it's not quite your actual shape?" The question landed in me like a stone in still water, sending rings outward in every direction. "Yes," I said quietly. "I know exactly what that feels like." She nodded, looking at the window where the rain was still falling. "I spent a long time being afraid of my own feelings," she said. "Especially the ones that didn't fit the version of me that everyone expected." She paused. "I'm less afraid now." I'm trying to be less afraid. The room was very quiet. Outside, the rain. Maya, I said. My voice came out softer than I intended. She turned to look at me. We were very close on the couch, close enough that I could see the faint gold flecks in her dark eyes. I think I need to tell you something, I said. Okay, she said. Her voice was careful and gentle. The voice you use when you already suspect what's coming and you're holding very still so as not to startle it. I think I've been falling in love with you, I said. Since that first day in the library. Maybe before I even knew your name. The words, once out, felt enormous and simple at the same time, like all true things. Maya set down her mug. She looked at me with an expression I would spend years learning to read in all its variations, but which I understood even then, in that first unguarded instance, for what it was. Leela, she whispered. Then, don't. My heart seized. I started to pull back, not physically, but in that internal way. The practice retreat I had rehearsed so many times, but then Maya reached out and took my hand. Don't stop, she said. Don't stop saying things like that. I stared at her. What? I've been trying to find the courage to say exactly that to you for weeks, she said. Her voice was low and slightly unsteady. I keep writing it and deleting it in text. I keep almost saying it and then making a joke instead. She laughed a little, that bright, helpless laugh. I've been so terrified. So have I breathed. I know, she said. I could see it. I think that's partly why it took me so long. We were both so carefully not saying it. We sat in the lamplight and the sound of rain, holding hands, looking at each other with the strange and enormous relief of people who have been speaking in code for months and have finally spoken plainly. So, I said after a long, bright silence. So, she said dot, and then she leaned forward. And I leaned forward and we kissed softly, briefly, with all the accumulated weight and tenderness of 2 months of almost. Her hand came up to cut my face and I felt tears prick unexpectedly at the corners of my eyes. Not from sadness, but from something I can only describe as recognition, the feeling of arriving somewhere you didn't know you'd been heading. And realizing it was exactly where you were supposed to be. When we pulled back, realizing it was exactly where you were supposed to be. Where you were supposed to be. When we pulled back. She was smiling and her eyes were bright. Hi, she said softly. Hi, I said. We sat there laughing like two people who couldn't quite believe their own luck. The weeks that followed were the best weeks of my life up to that point. Which is not a small thing to say. We were careful and deliberate with each other in the beginning. The way you are with something new and precious, aware of its fragility even as you're dazzled by its light. We had long conversations about what we each needed, what we were afraid of, what the shape of this thing between us was or could be. Maya was extraordinarily honest in a way I had rarely encountered. She said what she felt when she felt it, without performance or strategy, and it made me want to do the same. You don't have to rehearse with me, she told me one evening early on. You can just say the thing. It took practice. I was very good at rehearsing. But I was learning. We spent Saturdays at her apartment, which was smaller than mine but stuffier, with live plants on every windowsill, books in literal stacks on the floor. Borges conducting his philosophical business among the clutter with great dignity. She cooked for me, her grandmother's rice and beans, enchiladas verdes, soup that smelled like warmth itself. I would sit at her kitchen counter and do my reading while she cooked. And we would talk across the counter about everything, her stories. My dissertation, our families, our fears. Our small daily joys. I met her friends, her MFA cohort. A warm and chaotic group who had clearly already been told about me and received me with the slightly overwhelming enthusiasm of people who had been rooting for their friend's happiness. Her best friend, Soledad, who was finishing a novel about her Afro-Latina grandmother, took one look at me the first time we met and said, finally, which made Maya groan and me laugh, she met Priya again. And they became friends in their own right, texting each other about things that had nothing to do with me, which I found profoundly endearing. And we fell into each other fully and irrevocably. The way you fall into the best kind of sleep, not a falling at all, really, but a settling, a coming to rest. I was in love. I was, for the first time in my adult life, living inside my actual shape. The question of my family was something I held at a careful distance for those first weeks, aware of its weight but not yet ready to approach it. My parents knew I was seeing someone. I had told them that much. My mother had asked gently if it was someone nice, and I had said yes, very much so, and let the conversation move on. My father had made a joke about finally, which had made my stomach clench in a way I hadn't unpacked yet. I knew what was coming. I just wasn't ready to walk toward it. Maya never pushed. She understood from her own complicated history with family and expectations that some truths take their own time. She held the space around the subject with a patience and grace that made me love her more. "When you're ready," she said once, simply, and then went back to her book. I reached across and held her hand, and she turned her palm up and laced her fingers through mine without looking up from the page. And that small automatic gesture of belonging, that instinctive turning toward, was one of the most beautiful things I had ever experienced. December arrived like a reckoning. Went home for the holidays with Maya's voice in my ears and her smell still on the scarf I wrapped around myself at the airport. My parents lived in a suburb of San Jose in a house I had grown up in, full of Persian carpets and framed calligraphy and the particular smell of saffron and rosewater that I associated irrevocably with safety and complicated love. My mother cooked for 3 days before I arrived. My father had rearranged his schedule to be home. My younger sister Nasrin was there, sparkling and relentless, already asking questions before I had taken my coat off. "You look different," my mother said, studying me with that unnerving maternal precision. "Happy, I am happy," I said. "Tell us about this person you're seeing," my father said over dinner. His voice was easy, warm, the voice of a man expecting good news. I had rehearsed this. I had rehearsed it on the plane, in the car, while pretending to read and staring at the window instead. I had rehearsed a dozen versions of the sentence, testing its weight and its angles, trying to find the one that would land most softly. But when the moment came, what I said was the plain truth. "Her name is Maya," I said. "She's a writer. She's from Texas, and I'm in love with her." The table was quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of a family at ease, but the particular silence of words hanging in the air, waiting to see what will happen to them. My mother set down her fork. My father looked at me for a long moment, then looked at his plate. Nasrin, across the table, caught my eye with an expression that said, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." What followed was not a fight. My family were not people who shouted. What it was, instead, was a slow and painful conversation that lasted in various forms for the entire 10 days of my visit. My parents' love, which was real and complete, doing battle with their fears and their expectations and the weight of everything they had built their hopes on. My mother cried quietly in the kitchen. My father asked careful questions that were really expressions of grief. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue or justify. I just held steady as gently as I could and said, "This is true, and it has always been true. And I need you to know me." Nasrin was magnificent. She sat with me every evening in the room we had shared as children, and she said, "I always knew. And I always knew it would be beautiful, whoever it was." She made me show her pictures of Maya. She studied them with the reverence of someone appraising something precious and said, "She has kind eyes." "She does," I said. "Does she love you back?" "Yes." Nasrin squeezed my hand. "Then it's going to be okay." "All of it?" "It just takes time." I called Maya every evening from my childhood bedroom, and just hearing her voice, warm and steady and entirely herself, put something back into me that the days kept depleting. "How are you doing?" she would ask. "I'm okay," I would say. "I'm better when I'm talking to you." "Then let's talk," she would say. And we would for hours, about everything and nothing. About the stars visible from her window and the book she was reading, and the way Boris had knocked her coffee off the table that morning with the imperious nonchalance of a cat who has decided the world belongs to him. By the time I flew back in early January, something had shifted with my parents. Not resolved, not healed, but shifted. My mother hugged me at the airport for a long time and said quietly into my hair, "I want you to be happy. That is all I have ever wanted." My father pressed a book into my hands, a novel I'd mentioned wanting to read, and said gruffly, "You'll call when you land." It was not everything, but it was something. It was a door slightly open. I held it carefully. The way you hold something you believe in. January was cold and still and luminous. I came back to the city and went straight from the airport to Maya's apartment. She opened the door before I had finished knocking. She'd heard me on the stairs, and she looked at me, for 1 second with those dark, searching eyes, taking in the whole of me, the tiredness and the relief and everything the 10 days had cost. And then she pulled me into a hug that I felt in every part of my body. I pressed my face into her neck and breathed. Saffron and rosewater were not the only things that smelled like safety. "Hey," she said softly into my hair. "Hey," I said. "Come in." I made food. She had. The apartment smelled of something warm and spiced. And Boris was sitting on the kitchen counter with the air of a host who has done all the planning. And there were candles lit on the small dining table. I sat down and she brought me a bowl of soup and sat across from me and said, "Tell me everything," so I did. I told her about the dinner and the silence and my mother's tears and my father's careful questions and Nasrin's steadfast, brilliant love. I told her about the late-night conversations and the slow, painful opening of a door. I told her that it had hurt more than I expected and also hurt less than I feared. She listened to all of it, really listened. The way Maya listened, with her full self present. "Your parents love you," she said. When I finished. "I know," I said. "That's not in question. It's just love isn't always enough on its own." "No," she agreed. "But it's the necessary ground. Everything else can grow from it, given time." She reached across the table. "And Nasrin, she sounds extraordinary." "She is," I said. "I want you to meet her." Maya smiled slow and warm, the smile that did things to my equilibrium. "I'd like that." We ate the soup and talked and eventually ended up on our couch with Borges between us, pretending to sleep but clearly listening to every word, as all cats secretly do. And at some point, Maya turned to look at me with a serious expression that made my heart rate adjust. "Leela," she said, "I need to tell you something." "Okay," I said. "I'm in love with you," she said. "I said it to you once in November, but I want to say it again when we're not wet from the rain and slightly delirious." She smiled a little. "I'm in love with you. I want to be with you. Not as a beautiful temporary graduate school thing, as an actual long-term let's figure you little thing." I looked at her for a long moment. Borges opened one eye, then closed it again. "I'm in love with you too," I said. "And yes, to all of that." She leaned across the cat and kissed me. And Borges yowled with maximum offense and relocated to the armchair. And we both dissolved into laughter, and that laughing, that absurdity, that overwhelming ordinariness of it was how I knew it was real. What no one tells you about love the good. True kind is how much of it is ordinary. How much of it is Tuesday mornings and grocery lists and someone else's reading habits getting mixed up with yours. How much of it is learning another person's silences. The difference between the silence that means they're fine and the one that means something is turning over slowly in them and they need you to wait. Maya. And I built a life together slowly. Season by season, negotiating the 1,000 small details that constitute a shared existence. Whose apartment? Whose furniture? What to do about the fact that she was a night writer and I was a morning reader? What to do about Borges, who had opinions about everything and expressed them loudly. We were patient with each other. We fought occasionally small, human arguments about logistics and miscommunications and the accumulated fatigue of difficult weeks, and we learned how to fight. Which is to say, we learned how to argue without weaponizing. How to stay present when we were angry. How to come back toward each other after in March. Maya finished the first full draft of her story collection. She printed it out and laid it on the kitchen table and stood looking at it with an expression of awe and terror. And I stood beside her and felt something enormous on her behalf. Vicarious and tender. "It's done," she said. "It's done," I confirmed. She picked up the manuscript and held it and started to cry quietly. Privately, the way you cry when something has cost you everything and you're finally setting it down. I put my arms around her from behind and held on. And we stood there in the kitchen light while Boris sat on the table looking at the manuscript with professional suspicion. "She would have been proud of you," I said. "Her grandmother." I knew it without question. Maya nodded, not speaking. "You did it justice," I said. "More than justice." In April, my dissertation chapter on Teju coal was accepted by a major journal. And Maya made a cake, lopsided, purple frosted, with Dr. Farrak soon written on it in uneven letters, and we ate it for dinner on the floor of our apartment. because we hadn't gotten around to buying a proper dining table yet. And it was the best cake I had ever tasted. In May, Maya's mother came to visit. Elena Reyes was a small, sharp-eyed woman from San Antonio with her daughter's dark eyes and an additional quality I can only describe as tactical warmth. She was kind in a way that was also clearly assessing you, taking precise measurements. She took me to lunch on her second day without Maya, which I recognized as a form of direct examination and which I respected. Over enchiladas, she asked me about my family, my work, my intentions. I answered everything plainly and honestly. At the end of lunch, she looked at me for a moment, then said, "My daughter is not an easy person to love. She gives everything. She needs someone who can receive that without taking it for granted." "I know," I said. "I don't take it for granted. I am the beneficiary of the most extraordinary luck in meeting her, and I know that." Elena nodded slowly. "Good," she said. Then she picked up the check. I passed, apparently. That evening I heard Elena in the kitchen with Maya, talking in rapid Spanish, and then laughter, Maya's bright laugh and her mother's deeper, more reluctant one, and I sat in the other room with Borges and felt, quietly and completely, I homed out. The meeting with my parents happened in June, at a neutral location, a Persian restaurant in San Jose that my family loved, which was my mother's suggestion, which I took as a hopeful sign. Maya dressed carefully, not formally, but thoughtfully, a navy dress and her hair down, the silver nose stud she sometimes swapped out for other occasions left in. "I want them to meet me," she said, looking in the mirror. "Not a performance. They're going to love you," I said. "You don't know that. I know that anyone who spends an hour with you loves you. It's a documented phenomenon." She turned from the mirror and gave me that slow, warm smile and said, "You're very biased." "Deeply," I agreed. The dinner was not without tension. My father was quiet in the early part of the evening in the particular way that night he was taking measure. My mother was so determinedly warm that it was slightly alarming, the warmth of someone who has made a decision and is implementing it, with her entire self. Nasrin, who had driven up from the Bay Area specifically to be present, was perfect, natural and funny, and genuinely, immediately delighted by Maya. Maya was herself. Completely, entirely herself, curious and warm and funny. Asking my father questions about his engineering work that led him into an explanation that lasted 20 minutes and visibly pleased him despite himself. Talking with my mother about cooking, really talking, comparing recipes, asking about the dishes she had grown up with, receiving the information with genuine interest. Laughing at Nasrin's stories. After dinner, while my mother and Nasrin had gone to look at something, my father sat across from Maya and said, in the quiet way that carried real weight, "My daughter is very important to me." "I know," Maya said simply. "She's the most important person in my life." My father looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face, some shift in the fault line between fear and love. "Then we understand each other," he said. It was not a declaration of complete acceptance. There was still distance to cover, still time required. But it was a hand extended across a bridge that was still being built. And Maya took it. In the car driving home, she was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Your dad asked me to call him Reza." I looked at her. "He what?" At the end, when we were leaving, he said, "You can call me Reza." She was staring out the windshield, and there was something raw in her expression. I almost cried right there in the restaurant. I reached across and took her hand and held it. The whole drive home. It was October again. 1 year from when we had sat in the coffee shop after the panel and talked for 2 hours. And I had walked home feeling lit from the inside. Maya had been secretive for 3 weeks in a way that was slightly suspicious. Small things, a hushed phone call she finished quickly when I came into the room, a tab she closed on her laptop with too casual a movement, a package that arrived and was immediately relocated to the back of the closet. I noted these things with the quiet attention of a person who reads closely, and I did not ask about them, because some stories need to arrive in their own time. On a Saturday afternoon in the middle of October, a day with that particular sharp clarity of autumn, the air like cold water, Maya told me she wanted to take a walk. We went to the park where we had spent a Sunday afternoon in our first February together, the one with the old stone bridge over the creek. where we had sat on the railings and talked about the future with the nervous excitement of people who were just beginning to believe. They had one together. The leaves were orange and gold. The light was that afternoon slant that makes everything look slightly legendary. We stood on the bridge and watched the water. Maya was quiet, and I could feel her gathering herself. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "I know," I said. "You've been thinking about it for 3 weeks." She laughed, a little breathlessly. "How do you always occupational hazard?" I said. "Close reading." She turned to face me. Her eyes were serious and bright at once, that combination that I had come to know as Maya operating at maximum emotional honesty. "Leela," she said, "you know the story I've been working on? The one about 3 generations of women?" "Of course. I finished the final revision last month. I dedicated it to my grandmother." But in the acknowledgments, she stopped. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it with slightly unsteady hands and held it out to me. I took it and read the acknowledgment she had written. At the end of it, in her handwriting, were the words, "And to Layla, who taught me that the true shape of a person is the most beautiful thing in the world. Will you marry me?" I looked up. She had a ring in her hand, small and simple, a silver band with a tiny blue stone. "I know we have a lot still to navigate," she said. "Your family and mine and careers and cities and all of it. But I know I have known since November on your couch in the rain that I want to navigate all of it with you. I want to write all of it with you." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were bright. "So, will you?" I stood on the stone bridge in the October light, holding the piece of paper with her handwriting on it, and I thought about all of it. The girl by the window. The 2 hours in the coffee shop. The night of rain and revelation. The long, beautiful, ordinary work of loving someone and being loved in return. My father saying you can call me Reza. The kitchen counter and the soup and the lopsided cake. Borges and his labyrinthine dignity. All of it, the whole intricate, irreplaceable architecture of a life that had become our life. "Yes," I said. My voice came out clear and sure. "Yes, of course, yes." She slid the ring onto my finger. And then she kissed me, there on the bridge. In the October light, in the golden, ordinary, extraordinary afternoon, a woman walking her dog paused and smiled at us. An elderly man on a bench nearby clapped once, quietly. We were laughing. We were crying. We were both at once. "Hi," she said when we pulled back. Our old word. The first word. "Hi," I said. Above us, the trees let go of their leaves, and the air was full of gold. I have been asked since to describe what love feels like. People who know our story, who know the months of careful circling and the night of rain and the hard December and the bridge, people ask me. Wanting a summary, a clean and quotable answer, here's what I tell them. Love, the real kind, doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It arrives the way good light arrives in a room gradually, and then all at once, and then you can't imagine what it looked like before. It is not a feeling that happens to you. It is a practice you choose every morning, and it changes shape as you do. It is 2 people learning to be honest with each other in a world that doesn't always reward honesty. It is arguments and repairs and the hard conversations and the easy ones. It is someone handing you soup when you're exhausted. It is laughter so sudden and unguarded that it catches you off guard. It is the feeling of a hand turning, palm up, to receive yours, instinctive, automatic. Belonging. It is my father calling her Maya, and then later Mia in the soft way that means your family now. It is my mother and Elena Reyes standing in our kitchen one Thanksgiving, arguing about cooking technique with the warmth of women who have decided to love each other. It is Nasrin being the first phone call when good news arrives and the second when bad news does. It is Maya at her desk in the morning, still in her pajamas, scowling at a sentence that isn't right yet, and knowing that I can bring her coffee and sit beside her and she won't have to perform being okay if she isn't. It is her reading my dissertation drafts and marking the places where I'm hiding from what I actually mean. It is both of us. Living inside our actual shapes at last. She whispered, "Don't," and then she said, "Don't stop. Don't stop telling the truth. Don't stop being brave enough to say the thing." I think about that moment often. On the couch in November, the rain outside, the lamplight, the tentative impossible beginning of everything. I think about how close I came to saying nothing. How many years I had spent in the practice of saying nothing, of building walls. of telling myself the feeling was something smaller and more manageable than what it actually was. What I know now is this. The stories we tell ourselves about our own lives have the power to shape what those lives become. For a long time, I told myself a story in which my feelings were too complicated, too much, better set aside. Maya helped me write a different story, one in which the truth, however complicated, was worth the telling. This is a love story. But it is also a story about the moment a person decides to take up the full space of their own life. Those two stories for me happened at the same time. I do not think that is a coincidence. Borges is still alive, imperious and philosophical as ever, and has accepted the marriage with the dignified resignation of a cat who knows he's no longer the primary relationship but has decided to remain a significant player. He sleeps between us when we let him, and sometimes in the early morning, I lie awake in the particular quiet that belongs to people who have found their home in another person. And I listen to Maya's breathing and the sound of the city outside and the cat's deep purring. And I think, yes, this, exactly this, here in this ordinary miraculous life, I have found my actual shape, and it fits perfectly.